Bow to the people. I'm very glad to be preceded by a real intellectual and scholar so that I can just work my little polemics. And I know that this is a very intelligent room because, of course, Dr. Monteiro attracts intelligent people like a magnet. So it's a very good feeling to be here. I want to discuss the magnificent contributions of W.E.B. Du Bois, of course, but specifically the relevance of his work and his insights to the profound crisis in African American politics today. Those of you who are even a little bit familiar with me know that in about a second, two words are going to pop out of my mouth, and those words are Barack Obama. Now, Barack Obama did not create the current black political crisis, which is rooted, in fact, in the contradictions between two competing political tendencies that have always existed in black America, in the black American polity. The first tendency, or imperative, is towards black self-determination. That is the struggle to gain for our people the capacity to shape the world that we want to live in. There's another competing tendency, and that is the striving for greater representation within the already existing political culture of the United States. There's always been a great tension between these two tendencies represented in every black mind. These tendencies inevitably manifest themselves in our political behavior and the way we shape the groupings that we put together. This exacts a kind of push and pull between self-determination and the drive for more representation, even the drive for cosmetic representation. And that push and pull, I think, is such a constant that I believe it is an important aspect of what it means to be an African American, to have that push and pull between the urge to self-determination and the urge to representation in that larger culture. Both of these competing drives are in all of us, and they're an important part of what makes us us. I think that the friction between these two impulses is deeply involved in what Dr. Du Bois called the two-ness of the Negro. I think it's an aspect of that. So we're not going to get rid of these contradictions anytime in the foreseeable future. We have had them ever since there has been an us here. The contradiction is not the crisis. The crisis is that the advent of the first black president has effectively checkmated our self-determinationist imperative. So today, it's all representation and no self-determination. It's no longer power to the people, it's all power to Obama, which effectively means all power to Wall Street, although we lie to ourselves even in the face of all the evidence and say that's not what we mean. It's bad enough that our historical imperative to self-determination, and that is to independent, socially transformative political action, has been overwhelmed by the sheer exhilaration of nominal black representation in the highest places possible, that is, the White House. But it is even more catastrophic that the object of our adulation is a man whose every impulse is to deny our peoplehood, to deny that we are a distinct people. This is the man who made his national debut at the 2004 Democratic Convention saying there is no black America, there is only the United States of America. And many of us cheered. A lot of y'all cheered. You cheered because such a handsome and charming and presentable person was representing us on that national stage. Many of you didn't even hear what he said. You didn't hear that he was negating us as a people. Or you pretended that you didn't hear that. Or we said, well, you know, he has to say things like that because, you know, the white folks, they have to hear it. So he has to say that. We at Black Agenda Report have had some dealings with Mr. Obama. And we had dealings previous to his debut at the Democratic National Convention in 2004. A few months later, after that big speech, and it was just before Christmas of 2004, I had a chance to sit down and talk with Senator-elect Obama at his Chicago office. It was just me and him, a one-on-one, for about 35 minutes. The interview wasn't much on substance. He had a habit back then of choosing every word very, very carefully and talking so slowly that I thought that he was trying to run the clock out on me. The only noteworthy thing that I got out of him during that interview, during the formal part of the interview, was he said that he would not call for single-payer health care because he said the country wasn't ready for it. 5 years later, he would make sure that the country didn't get single payer when he made those backroom deals with the insurance industry and with the drug industry. And those were deals that would keep them in the system and will probably keep them in the system for decades because we lost that historic opportunity. After the formal interview was over, and I swear I don't know where this came from, but Obama said to me something that made my jaw drop. He said that there was no real contradiction between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. He said that their positions in the early 1900s could have been reconciled. And I was shocked. I didn't expect anything like that to come out of his mouth. And I was momentarily speechless. I'm thinking, what did he say? What did he mean by that? I was speechless. And about that time, Obama's showing me the door. So I find myself out in the hallway, walking to the elevator, and I have this red-hot anger. Who does this man think he is? And does he have any inkling of what he just said? Or does he think that even the most profound contradictions, like those between W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, can somehow be papered over if you're slick enough and you're charming enough and you're handsome enough and you smile right? Real contradictions, if they are painted over, result, of course, in the party with power winning. And it was in this moment, as I'm standing there waiting for the elevator, that I realized, and on a very, very personal level, that this guy that I just met, Barack Obama, was really thinking of himself. He saw himself. He was acting consciously as a fix-it man for power. But that was his job. And that's the way he looked at the conflict between W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. He was actually, in making that statement, dismissing their epic battle as something of far less consequence. It was something that he could apply, or someone should have applied an easy fix to, because it was just a petty parochial dispute. As groveling as the man from Tuskegee was, he certainly did see black folks as a distinct people. Booker T called black folks my people. Booker T was wrong in casting down his buckets with white capital. He was wrong in accommodating those who had murdered Reconstruction. But Booker T was still a race man in his own way. His differences with the full citizenship demands with which Du Bois is associated, and his active collaboration with what was then the new Jim Crow, because it was brand new, developed into an unbridgeable chasm between himself and Du Bois. But Booker T did not deny black American peoplehood. Rather, he accepted the post-Reconstruction verdict, and he accepted that black folks would be a subordinate people. In a real sense, he offered the flag of surrender to the terrorists who had overthrown black Reconstruction, and he surrendered to the northern capitalists who were cashing in on the favorable labor conditions that now existed in the New South. In fact, with Booker T. Washington, without Booker T. Washington, white folks could not even claim that there was a New South. But with Booker T. Washington, they could. And that probably is among the greatest services that Booker T. performed for Southern and Northern elites. He did so, however, as a black man, and he fought tooth and nail and claw for that position that he achieved as King Negro, but he did it as a race man. In that sense, despite his treacheries, he remains part of the internal black equation. Barack Obama is a different case entirely. He is not part of the internal black equation. He sees no fundamental difference, no fundamental contradiction between Booker T. and Du Bois, precisely because they are both race men. And he is anxious to relegate both of them and both of their positions to the dustbin of history. And that's what he calls reconciliation. The first chance that he got on the national stage, a stage that he was provided by the Democratic Leadership Council and their corporate backers, he took that opportunity to say there is no black America. In fact, he says, there was always just America, which granted was sometimes a bad place to be and bad things happened to people, but racism was never endemic to the United States of America. And he made that statement right here in Philadelphia during the campaign. I want to add something right here that relates to the irreconcilability of the differences between Booker T. Washington and those blacks who insisted on full citizenship rights and full equality. And that, of course, is the camp with which Du Bois would become a leader. When Booker T. flew that flag of surrender, and that was in 1895 at the Atlanta Exposition, he flew it on behalf of the Negro people. But at that time, Jim Crow had not fully triumphed. And Reconstruction in 1895 was not fully dead. Booker T. Washington, some people say, was simply accepting the idea that the fait accompli of Jim Crow was complete, and that all Booker T. Washington was really doing, according to his apologist, was facing up to a reality that already existed in the South. But his Atlanta Compromise speech took place a year before the Supreme Court ruled that separate but equal was constitutional in Plessy versus Ferguson. The High Court did not say that separate but equal was mandatory, and Jim Crow was at that point in time not yet universal in the South. That would take more years before it occurred. But here was Booker T. Washington telling all these assembled white businessmen from the North and from the South that it was, in his words, the most extreme folly for blacks to agitate for access to all public accommodations. He said that when Jim Crow was not yet the law of the land and was not yet fully established in the South itself. Booker T. mocked black people who, in his words, valued a seat in Congress or the state legislature more than real estate and more than industrial skills. Now understand, he wasn't talking about the past, sometime in the long ago in Reconstruction. He was talking in the present time, in 1895. And there were still blacks in the state legislature of South Carolina in that period of time. There were still blacks in the state legislature in Georgia. The last black didn't leave the state legislature of Georgia until 1908. The last black congressman was still in office in 1895 when Booker T. Washington flew his flag of surrender, when he was saying that people should start off at the bottom instead of trying to start off at the top. He was speaking of black folks who dared to run for elective office before they got their farming and masonry skills right. Wilmington in North Carolina was run by a fusion government at that time, a fusion of white populists and mostly black Republicans. The fusionists, the black Republicans and white populists also controlled the state. They had won the elections of 1896 and 1898 with tremendous black support. Black voters in North Carolina were quite anxious to exercise their full citizenship. They turned out 85%. They weren't about to think about just going back to tilling the soil and keeping their mouths shut. Reconstruction, in other words, was not wholly dead in 1895, although you couldn't understand that to hear Booker T. Washington. It was finally wiped out 3 years after Booker T. Washington's Atlanta speech. Whites marched on the city of Wilmington, which had, as I said, this fusion government. They went to an armory, they seized arms, and they attacked the black side of town. They killed at least 100 black folks. They then ran the rest of the population into the swamps outside of town. And Wilmington, which had been a black majority city, never regained its black majority. Congressman George White was the last black congressman in Washington. He was in Wilmington at that time. He left, and he didn't stop running until he got to Washington. His term expired in 1901, and there was not a black presence in Congress until 1929. When Congressman White was in office, he actively criticized from the House floor Booker T. Washington for saying that people like him shouldn't be aspiring to start off on top, should not be engaged in politics. Black lawmakers, according to the white folks, had spent their time in Reconstruction Congresses eating chicken and gambling and stealing and taking bribes. And the rationale for the crushing of Reconstruction was that the moral depravity of the Negro was bringing the entire South down, and in order for civilization to be saved, something had to be done. The blacks had to be disenfranchised. That narrative was the white folks' epitaph to Reconstruction, and it seemed that it was being affirmed by Booker T. Du Bois' great contribution, or one of his great contributions, was to correct that narrative in his volume, Black Reconstruction. But Du Bois, in 1897, decided to embark on a much more fundamental project. He decided that he would do a study to paint a picture of who these Negro people who were being vilified as less than human and unworthy of citizenship, he would do a study of who they were. White lies were being used to justify white crimes against black people. It was a kind of perfect circle of oppression that did not require one fact in order to be maintained. That's the kind of environment in which W.E.B. Du Bois decided he would do his study of the Philadelphia Negro. Facts, as assembled by W.E.B. Du Bois, do not necessarily make you free, but they can tell you what kind of state that you're in. Du Bois wanted to describe the actual conditions of black life in the city, where people lived, how they worked, for what kind of compensation, what kind of social networks and organizations they built in those environments, and how 40,000 black Philadelphians coexisted with white Philadelphia. It was a huge and grand project, and it was the first true urban sociological study in the United States. But the significance of the Philadelphia Negro is much more than just another black first. Du Bois was not doing this out of simple curiosity, although, of course, he was curious about the state of black affairs. And he wasn't doing it simply to show that a well-educated black person could employ the language and the methodology of the modern science of sociology, although it was also important to Du Bois to do that. This study was necessary at that point in history in order to describe a people whose portrait had been horribly distorted since their arrival in America. The purpose was not to prettify the black image, but to get a true picture of the lives of these particular human beings. Du Bois wanted to know, and he wanted to share this knowledge, how these people navigated life in a racist society, where they wanted to go with these lives, and what was holding them back. Because those were the facts that had to inform any struggle for the empowerment of those people. He wanted to take the most detailed snapshot possible of the black people of Philadelphia and then shed light on the broader state of black life, the black condition in the United States. And that is what makes the Philadelphia Negro so seminal and so foundational a contribution. It reveals, in Du Bois's words, a people who are a palpitating group and not a sick, inert body of crime, a people who are a long historical development and not a transient occurrence. In other words, he was taking a picture, a very detailed picture, of a people in motion. The Philadelphia Negro is a sociological study that is of concrete use to the people who were studied. It's not a piece of counter-propaganda, although it had some uses as counter-propaganda. Counter-propaganda has its place if it is grounded in fact. But counter-propagandists can also wind up fooling themselves and fooling the people that they're trying to help. Amilcar Cabral said, above all, tell no lies. When you rework history and you distort or you cherry-pick facts of history, that can be quite dangerous. And this, I think, is especially true when we're talking about black America, where there exists two competing political currents that I talked about before, representationism and self-determinationism. And I want to give an example. I want to go back to the founding of the Republic to make that comparison. What black person do you associate with the American Revolution? That's a question. Christmas addicts, of course. There could be only one answer because that is the only person, black person, that we associate with the American Revolution. He's the guy who got shot along with a bunch of white guys in Boston a couple of years before the secession of the white settlers got underway. One guy, but 100,000 blacks rallied to the British side in that war, in one way or another, because the British offered freedom. For the vast majority of black people, this was a no-brainer. There was no other choice but that. All that George Washington and his insurgents promised was more slavery. So in overwhelming numbers, blacks backed the British because that was the only rational choice. Yet somehow, all we remember is Christmas addicts. We don't celebrate people like Colonel Ty. You probably never heard of Colonel Ty. Colonel Ty was a black slave from New Jersey who led black and integrated guerrilla groups that killed and captured scores of George Washington's followers all over the state of New Jersey. They especially targeted rebel slaveholders, and most of the slaveholders were rebels. They knew what they were fighting for. Colonel Ty was so enthusiastic about killing these people that one day on a raid, he shot himself, and he died of lead poisoning. Now, I think that Colonel Ty was a bad brother. He was a brave and courageous soldier who was fighting for his freedom and for his people's freedom. So why are we so singularly fixated on Crispus Attucks? It's not a rhetorical question. Clearly, Colonel Ty, and that means also the 100,000 blacks who sided against the slaveholder-led rebellion, don't conform to the American narrative of the Revolution, which is that it was a fight for universal freedom, somehow implicit somehow. Therefore, the entire saga of black people, all black people except Crispus Attucks, during that Revolutionary War period had to be suppressed. And Crispus Attucks' gang fight with British soldiers a couple of years before the war was substituted for the experience of the race as a whole. Unfortunately, it's not just white people who have done this substitution. Black organizations have for generations insisted on making Crispus Attucks the icon of the revolution. That's because his story fits, or it can be made to fit, into the black representationist model of history and of politics. Crispus Attucks is made to represent for us in the revolution, when actually the vast bulk of us opposed the white settler rebellion. Educated black men and women who boosted Crispus Attucks as our esteemed representative in the great patriotic war, most of them knew full well that thousands of black fighters and their families left Yorktown, Virginia with the British when the British surrendered there. They knew that George Washington's men were on the shoreline in Yorktown screaming that the Brits should give them back their slaves. That is well-documented history. It's not an obscure fact at all. It was well known to educated black folks. They knew that more blacks left with the British from Charleston and from Savannah and from New York, and we can only speculate what kind of hell the rest of the 100,000 who couldn't get out caught from those victorious white settlers after the war. But Crispus Attucks was the icon of choice because he was useful in making a pleading for more representation. This duality, this two-ness of the Negro, which is taking license with Du Bois, but I just did, means that one of those two Negroes that live in every black body is always ready to take the wrong side in order to be represented in the larger American political culture. As I said from the very beginning, this contradiction has always been with us, but it reaches its most grotesque form today with the urge to embrace the person who is the ultimate in representation, who is also the commander-in-chief of the imperial war machine. And so we have black people, only 7% of whom favored an invasion of Iraq if it would result in the death of thousands of Iraqi civilians. And that was under, of course, George Bush, but who seem not even to notice when Barack Obama makes war on Africa. This is one aspect of the current black political crisis, and it is an internal crisis. It is not a crisis that is imposed from the outside. The political crisis comes as a result of our own contradictions. It is a crisis because it causes us to ask, who are these African Americans? Who are these people that we thought we knew? Who are we that we thought we knew? We had every reason to believe and every reason to constantly repeat that African Americans are the most consistently progressive cohort of people in the United States when it comes to issues of peace and social justice and economic justice. We know this from our past voting behavior. We know this from polls, and we know this from the life work of our greatest leaders. We know it in voluminous detail from W.E.B. Du Bois, from the documentation of Black Reconstruction, which he published in 1935. Most particularly, we are aware that the 600 black Republicans and their white allies who were elected to reconstructed state governments created from scratch a system of public schools and public hospitals and social services that had not previously existed in the South. Du Bois meticulously shows a people coming straight out the box from slavery, civilizing a morally depraved region. We know the institutions that they built in the South remain even after blacks were excluded from the body politic. We know our essential progressive character. And I think that we know that this interlude with the Obama madness will pass, and we will once again be guided by the smart side of our bifurcated brains and proceed on the road to self-determination and to human progress. Power to the people.